J.D. Vance steps into a diner, expecting a burger and a break, but the air turns sour the second the bell rings. Turns out, some doors don't open as wide as they seem, and this one's about to slam shut in his face. What starts as a pit stop flips into a showdown that'll leave you wondering, when's the last time a simple meal turned into a battle of wills? Toss your take in the comments. I'm hooked on hearing your stories. The place screamed old-school charm, the kind of joint that had been flipping patties since the 70s. Its neon sign flickered like it was gasping for life, and every time that door swung wide, a blast of grilled meat and fresh coffee hit the night air, practically begging you to come inside. J.D. Vance had heard the hype earlier. A local wouldn't quit yapping about their killer meatloaf and fries sliced by hand. After a day of endless meetings, plastered on grins, and policy talk that drained his soul, he was done. All he wanted was a quiet booth and something hot on a plate before the drive back. The bell chimed, a sharp ding, as he crossed the threshold. It was small, cozy, the kind of spot where the same crowd parked in the same seats every night. A wall of Polaroids near the register, faded and curling, showed off decades of smiling faces, waitresses, truckers, kids with milkshakes. The air was thick with bacon grease and the bitter edge of brewed coffee, chatter humming low like a radio on in the background. J.D. took a breath, ready to fade into the scene. Then he saw her, Emily, the hostess, mid-20s, apron askew, mid-smile until her eyes landed on him. That grin dropped fast, a flicker of, oh, crap, crossing her face before she could hide it. Her lips pressed tight, and she fussed with her apron like she needed a plan. J.D. clocked the room, heads were turning. A guy with a half-eaten burger leaned over, whispering to his buddy. A woman in plaid, call her Sarah, slammed her mug down, her gaze sharpening for a heartbeat before sliding away. J.D. wasn't green. He'd felt that chill before, the kind that creeps in when you're not welcome. But a diner? This wasn't some power play meeting or a trap-the-guest TV spot. Emily stepped up, brushing a curl back. Good evening, she said, her voice tight, like she was reading from a script she didn't like. You dining in or taking out? J.D. let out a low, tired laugh, scrubbing a hand over his neck. Dining in, if that's all right. Her pause hung there, thick and heavy, way too long for a simple ask. She flicked a look at the kitchen, then back. I gotta check something. 1 second. She bolted through the swinging doors, leaving J.D. stranded, the bell's echo fading into a weird quiet. More eyes drifted his way. A guy at the counter shifted, fork hovering. A sharp mutter cut through, too soft to catch, too loud to ignore. J.D. exhaled, slow and steady, loosening his shoulders. Something was up, and it wasn't the fryer. Voices leaked from the kitchen, muffled and choppy, like a fight brewing behind closed doors. He wasn't assuming anything. Maybe they were slammed. Maybe it was nothing. He'd waited out. Emily swung back out, and now she was all business. Sorry, sir, she said, her tone locked down. We can't serve you tonight. The words hit like a punch, but it wasn't just her. It was the way the room tightened, like everyone was holding their breath. This wasn't about a late shift or no tables. This was personal, raw, and real. J.D. stood there, the diner's buzz fading to a tense hush, as the truth sank in. Stick around, this night's about to flip the script. The diner went still, not dead quiet, but close enough that the sizzle of the grill out back sounded loud, like it was daring someone to break the spell. J.D. Vance stood there, letting Emily's words, "We can't serve you tonight," sink in like a bad punchline. The air felt heavy, charged, like the whole place was waiting to see if he'd storm out or dig in. He didn't flinch, just studied her face. She wasn't mad, just steady, like she'd drawn a line she wouldn't cross, or maybe someone else had drawn it for her. J.D.'s eyes flicked past her to the kitchen window. 2 cooks hovered there, half-shadowed by a heat lamp stacked with plates, their faces blank as stone. He cleared his throat, keeping it light. Did I miss something? Did I do anything wrong? Emily didn't squirm this time. It's just, we'd rather not serve you tonight, she said, dodging the question like a pro. No excuses about closing early. No, we're out of fries, just that, plain and firm. J.D. planted his hands on his hips, letting out a slow breath through his nose. He'd faced worse, debates that turned into shouting matches, interviews rigged to make him trip. But this? Getting the boot from a roadside joint hit different. A cough snapped the moment. A grizzled guy near the counter, maybe 60, in a beat-up denim jacket, shook his head like he'd seen this movie before. He stabbed at his eggs, muttering to no one in particular. Across the room, a woman, let's call her Lisa, shifted in her booth, her face a mask. Next to her, a guy in his late 20s, Mike, leaned back with his arms crossed, smirking like he'd bet on this exact scene unfolding. JD took it all in, the quick glances that darted away, the stares that lingered too long, the ones that gleamed with something smug. The weight pressed on him, but he had choices. He could walk out, shrug it off, let the night swallow it. He could push back, demand answers, maybe even hint at who he was, a U.S. senator, and watch the headlines explode by breakfast. Instead, he went rogue. "All right," he said, voice calm and even, nodding like he was agreeing to a deal. "Can I talk to the manager?" That threw them. Emily blinked, her cool cracking for a second as she shot another look at the kitchen, like she needed a lifeline. The old guy at the counter grumbled something under his breath. A short laugh popped from near the window, sharp and disbelieving, like they couldn't believe he'd doubled down. JD just waited, steady as a rock. Emily vanished again, this time through a side door. The diner ticked on, a coffee sip here, a plate sliding across the counter there, but the chatter stayed low, ice sneaking his way. Then the door swung wide, and out stepped a guy in his late 40s, broad like a linebacker, arms crossed over a grease-smeared apron. His name tag read Tom. He didn't waste time with pleasantries, just sized JD up and said, "Heard you've got a question." It wasn't friendly. It wasn't even neutral, it was a dare, rough around the edges. JD met his stare, cool and unreadable. He wasn't here to flex or fight, he just wanted the why. "Yeah," JD said, keeping it simple. "I'd like to know why you won't serve me." Tom snorted, a quick huff through his nose, like he'd been braced for it but still didn't want the hassle. He wiped his hands on his apron, glancing at the scattered customers still pretending not to eavesdrop, though some didn't even try. "Look," Tom said, shifting his stance, "this ain't personal." JD raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at his lip. "Feels pretty personal." Tom's jaw flexed, and he rubbed the back of his neck, finally letting out a sigh. "Folks around here have their thoughts about you, about what you stand for. I've got a place to run, and I don't want any mess." JD nodded slow, letting it settle. "So me grabbing a burger's a mess?" Tom didn't bite right away. He flicked a look at the counter, where the old guy in the denim jacket was chewing slower now, fork-paused. In the booth, Mike still watched, arms crossed, like this was primetime TV. JD had seen this dance before, not quite like this, but close. It wasn't about one call. It was the build-up, the whispers, the pressure cooking under the surface. He leaned in a hair, locking eyes with Tom. "Be straight with me. Is this you, or just you keeping the peace?" Tom's fingers twitched against his apron, and for a flash, something flickered, maybe doubt, maybe a crack in the armor. Before he could answer, Mike piped up from the booth, a sharp laugh cutting through. "Oh, come on, man, this ain't that complicated. You're just not wanted here, easy." JD turned, sizing him up. Mike grinned, itching for a scrap, the type who'd poke a bear just to see it growl. JD didn't take the bait. He swung back to Tom. "I'll bounce if that's what you really want." The offer hung there, a lifeline for Tom to grab or dodge. Tom's gaze darted to the kitchen, then back, his voice low. "I just don't want this turning ugly." JD nodded again. "Same here." Neither moved, the silence stretching tight. Then JD did the last thing anyone expected. He pulled out a chair, sat down, and said, "Then let's talk." The diner froze, but trust me, this is just the warm-up. Things are about to get real. JD Vance settled into the chair, hands resting easy on the table, like he'd just clocked in for a casual chat instead of staring down a room full of side-eye. The diner didn't know what to do with that. No slamming doors, no raised voices, just a guy sitting there, calm as you please. Tom, the manager, blinked at him, caught off guard, then let out a slow breath. "Talk," he echoed, like the word tasted weird in his mouth. JD shrugged, a faint tilt to his head. "You don't want me here, I get it. But I don't get why. So let's figure it out." A low chuckle rolled from Mike in the booth, the late 20s guy with the smirk. "Man, this dude's got guts," he said, half impressed, half mocking. JD didn't bite, keeping his focus on Tom, who hovered over the chair opposite, gripping the backrest like it was holding him up. Flour dusted his apron, probably from flipping pancakes since dawn. "I run this place," Tom said finally, voice rough but steady. "I don't stir up trouble. I don't want my name in the papers. But I've got people to think about, regulars, staff, this whole little world." JD nodded, leaning forward just a touch. "All right. So what's this world think of me?" Tom glanced over his shoulder, like he half expected the answer to stroll out of the kitchen. Emily, the hostess, shifted behind the counter, uneasy. The old guy in the denim jacket, let's call him Bill, kept his eyes on his plate, but his fork hadn't moved in a minute. Tom turned back, exhaling hard. Folks here don't trust suits. Politicians especially. And some stuff you've said, some things you back, it rubs people wrong. JD leaned back, crossing his arms loose. Fair enough. But you don't know me, do you? Tom paused, caught in the question. Not face to face, no. JD pressed in, voice still even. So if I was just some random guy off the highway, no TV, no name, would we be doing this dance? The room went quiet again, JD's words hanging there like a challenge nobody wanted to grab. Tom's jaw tightened, but something shifted in his eyes, a crack, small but real. Before he could answer, Mike cut in from the booth, scoffing loud. This ain't about TV, man. It's about people knowing who you are. JD swung his gaze over, steady. And who's that? Mike grinned, leaning forward now, loving the spotlight. You're the guy who talks like he gets us, regular folks, but you're just another suit playing the game. JD nodded slow, like he was chewing on that. Okay, he said, resting his forearms on the table. Then tell me, what should I have done different? Mike blinked, thrown off. He'd expected a fight, not a question. You're serious? JD didn't flinch. You want me out, cool. But you've got the mic, say what's on your mind. The diner was attuned now. No clinking plates, no kitchen chatter, just the hum of the grill and every ear tuned in. Tom sighed, rubbing his neck like this was the last thing he signed up for. This wasn't the vibe I wanted tonight. JD cracked a small, worn-out smile. Me neither. That broke something, just a little. The air didn't feel like a wall anymore. It felt like a thread pulling taut, ready to snap or unravel. Bill at the counter muttered, damn shame a guy can't just eat. And a couple folks smirked, the tension bending but not breaking. JD kept his eyes on Tom. You said people think I'm full of it. Why? Tom shook his head, dropping into the chair across from him at last. They think you sell the working class story, hard times, big dreams, but you're still up there, making promises that don't stick. Same old song. And folks here? They don't let that go. JD tapped a knuckle on the table, thinking. I don't blame him, he said, low and real. Tom huffed a dry laugh. Yeah, well, nobody ever does. A beat hung there, then Bill piped up again, his voice gravelly from years of yelling over machines. I put 38 years in a mill, 38 damn years. Watched my buddies lose everything when it shut down. Watched families split town 'cause there was nothing left. Politicians rolled through, shook hands, said they'd fix it, then peeled out. Gone. JD met his stare, unflinching. And you think I'm one of 'em? Bill held his gaze, long and hard, then shrugged. Dunno. But you're the first one who didn't bolt when we pushed back. That landed like a stone in still water. Emily glanced at Tom. The cooks peeked out from the kitchen, swapping looks. Even Mike went quiet, his smirk gone. JD let it sit, then turned to Tom. So what's the call? Tom tapped the table, looked toward the kitchen, then stood. Lisa, he called to the counter. Grab him a menu. A ripple ran through the room, surprise, not shock. Mike snorted, but didn't push. Lisa hesitated, then snagged a laminated sheet and walked it over. JD took it with a nod. Thanks. Tom shook his head, half laughing. Still not sure I like you. JD grinned, flipping the menu open. Don't have to. The grill fired up again, and the night shifted gears. Things were about to get tastier. JD Vance sat there, menu in hand, but his eyes weren't on the laminated pages. They were scanning the diner, reading the room like a map. Tom, the broad-shouldered manager in his late 40s, stood by the kitchen, arms crossed, watching JD like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't trust. The grill sizzled back to life, plates clattered, and the hum of conversation crept in, but the tension hadn't melted, not fully. It was like the diner was holding its breath, waiting to see if this would end in a handshake or a headline. Lisa, the waitress in her mid-30s, poured JD a cup of coffee without a word, her movements quick but careful, like she wasn't sure which side of the line she was on. JD nodded thanks, taking a sip. Strong, he said, raising an eyebrow. A few chuckles rippled through the room, soft, but real. Lisa smirked, shaking her head. We don't mess around here. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall, a sign the night might not end in a standoff. Tom sighed, rubbing a hand over his face, and trudged back to JD's table, dropping into the seat across from him. All right, he said, voice low and tired, not from the shift, but from years of carrying this place and its people. Since you're here, hit me with something. JD set the menu down, leaning in slightly. Like what? Tom tilted his head, studying him. You ever been turned away like this before? JD thought about that, the coffee steaming between them. Sure, he'd caught flack, people cheering one day, booing the next. That came with the gig. But this? A diner, a simple craving for a burger, turning into a no thanks with that much weight behind it? Not like this, he admitted, voice steady. Tom nodded, slow, like that confirmed something he'd been chewing on. Most guys in your shoes, I mean, a senator, would have walked. Made a stink. Maybe called a lawyer, got us on the news by dawn. JD smirked, a flicker of humor in his tired eyes. Thought about it. Tom barked a laugh, shaking his head. Figures. But then he sobered, fingers tapping the table. You're not gonna flip everyone's opinion tonight. JD nodded, taking another sip of coffee. I know. Tom exhaled, rubbing his neck again. And I can't promise I won't regret letting you eat here come morning. JD grinned wider. Fair enough. From the counter, Bill, the old guy in the denim jacket, maybe 60, spoke up, not looking up from his coffee. Still a damn shame a man can't grab a burger without a fight. JD turned toward him, catching the gruff honesty in his voice. Looks like that's changing now, he said, voice easy but firm. Lisa appeared a minute later, sliding a plate in front of him, a classic cheeseburger, golden fries piled high, simple but perfect. JD picked it up, took a bite, and the room went quiet for a heartbeat. Then, deadpan, he said, a little dry. The diner froze, then Tom let out a real, gut-deep laugh, the first honest one of the night. A few others joined in, and Lisa rolled her eyes, shaking her head. JD set the burger down, wiping his hands on a napkin. Kidding. It's good. Tom shook his head again, still smirking. You're a handful, Vance. JD nodded. Heard that before. Mike, the late 20s guy in the booth, didn't chime in, but his smirk was gone. He sat up straighter now, arms uncrossed, watching JD like he was trying to figure out if this was a show or something deeper. The diner started feeling like a diner again, forks clinking, coffee cups refilling, the low buzz of talk rebuilding. People still had their doubts, their gripes, but the edge had dulled. JD ate slow, the weight of the night settling in, but he wasn't alone in it anymore. This wasn't just about a meal, it was about proving something, even if just for one night. And trust me, the best part's still coming, don't blink. What if one burger could bridge a divide, or at least crack it wide open? JD Vance sat there, chewing his fries, the diner buzzing around him like it was waking up from a long nap. The tension? Still there, but softer now, like a storm that had blown over but left the air charged. Tom, the manager in his late 40s, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching JD like he was still trying to crack a code. Lisa, the mid-30s waitress, zipped by with a coffee pot, refilling cups without missing a beat, her earlier hesitation gone. This wasn't just a meal anymore. It was a moment, and the whole place felt it. JD wiped his hands, pushing the plate aside, and caught Tom's eye. You know, he said, voice low but clear, I grew up in places like this, small towns, tight-knit, where folks worked their hands raw and still got left behind. I felt that frustration, that nothing changes weight. Yeah, I went to school, got this gig, but I didn't forget. Tom's eyebrows lifted, just a hair, and his fingers tapped the table, less guarded now, more thoughtful. Bill, the old guy in the denim jacket, maybe 60, looked up from his coffee, his weathered face creasing. You're saying you get it, he said, voice rough as gravel. But getting it and doing something are two different things. JD nodded, no defensiveness, just honesty. True. And I'm not here to sell you on me. I walked in for a burger, not a debate. But I'll listen, really listen, if you've got more to say. The room shifted again, quieter now, but not cold. Mike, the late 20s guy in the booth, hadn't said a word since JD's dry burger quip, but his arms were uncrossed, his posture less like he was waiting for a fight and more like he was thinking. Emily, the mid-20s hostess, lingered near the counter, stealing glances, her earlier firmness softened into curiosity. Even the cooks in the kitchen poked their heads out, trading nods like they were in on something new. Tom exhaled, long and slow, running a hand through his hair. Look, he said, I've run this place for 20 years. Seen politicians come and go handshakes, promises, then poof, they're gone. Folks here don't forget that. You stuck around. That's something. JD leaned forward, elbows on the table. Maybe it's a start. Not a fix, but a start. Tom cracked a small smile, the kind that said he wasn't sold, but he wasn't dismissing either. Maybe. Lisa slid by again, topping off JD's coffee. You sticking around for dessert? she asked, half joking, half serious. JD chuckled, shaking his head. Nah, but I'll take a to-go coffee. Long drive ahead. She grinned, grabbing a cup. Strong, like before? You bet, he said, and a few folks nearby laughed. Soft, real laughter, not the tense kind from earlier. As JD stood, Bill raised his mug in a quiet salute. Next time, order the meatloaf. He grunted, and the room chuckled again. Mike finally spoke, his voice quieter now. You're still a suit, Vance. But I'll think about it. JD nodded, meeting his gaze. Fair enough. Thinking's a good place to start. He paid up, slipped a generous tip under his plate, and headed for the door, the bell jingling behind him. Outside, the neon sign buzzed, brighter now, like it had found its second wind. JD climbed into his car, coffee in hand, the diner's glow fading in the rearview. Inside, the chatter picked up, forks clinked, plates scraped, and Tom leaned against the counter, watching the door close. Well, he muttered to Lisa, that's one for the books. And it was. That night, in a little diner nobody'd write home about, something shifted, not a miracle, not a resolution, but a crack in the armor. People still had their doubts, their gripes, their long memories, but for one night, a conversation happened. A real one. In a world ready to yell. Sometimes the power's in staying, listening, and proving, even just for a moment, that not every clash has to end in a fight. So, here's my question for you. Have you ever been in a spot where you had to pick, walk away, or stay and listen? Hit me with your story in the comments. I'm all in to hear how you'd navigate that diner door.